a learning system that is intentionally and purposely different. They want to look at ability to cater to all students, not just students that potentially fit in a particular box. So for me personally, being the dad of 3 girls, it's really important for me to look at, okay, well, what's an education worth having for them? And prior to being in Queensland, having worked at a boys' school as well in Sydney, what does it mean for an education worth having for the boys? So for me, generally, these 8 things really resonate with me. And I think today it's more around that bottom left one, talking and sharing a little bit of my own research journey or journeys, and what I found to be something that is at the moment being used by the team and by a few different schools as well around the world. So with the school, when people always ask, okay, well, what are you actually creating up there in Noosa? This is ultimately what it will look like. A day school, a distance school, because it's really easy to, well, much easier than every other state to start a distance school in Queensland. There are now 23 of them now. And the paperwork that you submit, as I was telling the previous group, is actually the same to NASAB as the paperwork that you do through your 5-year cycle anyway. So we thought that to capture a bigger, wider audience and to cater for students that might want that distance type of learning, that we would have that offering as well. And we know up in Noosa, there's a really big homeschool community as well. So to be able to create learning hubs to cater for them, so that they can have meaningful learning experiences that are more collaborative as opposed to individualized, that's really important and dear to me and the boards as well. So for us, our metric of success is after consulting the community, they found that most school with their learning profile, that they actually didn't really understand the language. And it was a space that we really want to invest in, looking at these future ready skills for our learners, and to be able to articulate their success, and for students to be able to then self-reflect on where they're at and how they can improve as well. So what we found was that, you know, instead of reinventing the wheel, a common language was the 6 C's, or, you know, even smaller, the 3 C's that generally students and parents can unpack and understand. So that's what we use as our metric of success into our learning program. Our learning program, because we don't have year levels and we're group age based, we have designed our learning program in a thematic based approach rather than looking at subject based approach. So over the course of the term, each student, no matter what year level they're in or what age group they're in, we always start up the top with people looking at self, looking at how self relate to others and cultures, looking at their family history, and then moving along to then wider in looking at the planet in term 2. In term 3, looking at the mystery and phenomena of the world, and what does that mean, and how does potentially, you know, we mimic, you know, what we do around the world. And then in term 4, looking at what's next, the future, the progress. So looking at using this approach, what it allows is that for us, that horizontal or vertical learning, not having year levels. So I know a lot of schools already play in that space in a well-being or house-based sense, but what might that look like in a learning and learning programming sense? That's what we've developed. And the good thing with this is that our biggest sell, or our biggest point of difference at the school, is that parents will be able to choose when they take their 12-week of holidays. So by grouping learning, if parents want to take 3 weeks of holidays in the middle of the term, because it's cheaper to fly overseas, they can do that. They would then just not redo, but they would then catch up on that learning they have missed when they come back. that way, it actually won't affect their learning or anyone else's learning. Or if they want to take an extended period of time, they would then miss multiple blocks of learning. That's okay. They would make that up when they come back. The premise is that, it will be 12 weeks of holidays a year that they can take. So moving then one step narrower lens, through my research, a couple of years ago, I really want to look at this notion of deeper learning and how do we create awesome learning experiences for the boys. So it got me to ask, my aim was to ask 100 teachers around the world, and I ended up getting 98. So what do they think about when they're designing learning experiences, and what do these rich, impactful learning experiences look like, feel like, and these were originally my ponderings. So why and how, and ultimately, what does it look like? And also too, what are some achievable goals to actually make it happen? Because, a question that the previous group had just before was, how do we, distill all these different elements into a rich learning experiences? And generally you can't, you can't implement too many things at the same time, because then everyone gets lost. So these were my 3 questions that I asked those 98 teachers. How do you know when students are deep learning in the classroom? How do you plan for that to occur? And how do you reflect on the quality of deep learning in your classroom? I might just give you 30 seconds to think about that. Just to, how do you know students are deep learning in your classroom? How do you plan for that? And how do you reflect on the quality of deep learning in your classroom? Okay. So what I found was that every school is different. Every school has their own unique contexts in every way. And there were actually a lot of inconsistency across the school, even in, looking at their teaching and learning frameworks. And once they, when the schools that do well, when they can articulate their mission, their vision, their values, and, their core business of learning, there was this notion that popped in over and over again of this drop-in, drop-out consultants in our education system, where a consultant would say, hey, here my 5-step awesome plan of how to fix it. But it doesn't actually look into the school's unique context or whether it will actually work in that particular school. So that 3rd point came out a lot. And the 4th point is that we're all so passionate about our profession, and we are so deeply engaged in all our talk and conversations around how to improve. Generally, there's so much talk that sometimes there's no actionable outcome. So what does that look like, to make sure that there's an actionable outcome? And a lot of the times conversations are lost. They're rich hallway conversations, but then either it doesn't get action or we get forgotten about it. One thing that popped up as a wondering from a lot of the participants were, how might we leverage technology in and play in that space? When we're talking about then conversations are lost, how do we potentially leverage technology to support that? And after looking at all the different, elements and all the different answers, and some of these, you might have thought about just before when I gave you some time, there were 50 elements that I came up with, or the participant came up with, that really resonated with the design of deep learning experiences. So, for instance, when we're designing learning experiences, how do we celebrate learning? How might the budget affect the type of learning experience it is or are? What are some potential blockers? what does assessment look like? Are there student agency in that particular learning experiences? Doesn't mean it has to, but what might that look like for that particular learning experience or that particular unit of work? And I love the design thinking or the design framework, but what I found was that people generally think of it as a linear approach or a circular approach, but when I really looked deeply into the framework, there's actually a lot of overlap. And when you look at the different experiences in different stages, you can actually often jump from one to the other. So for instance, if we start on the top right with the diagnostic stage, sometimes you might then go to ideate and jump across then to reflect about it, and then go through that little cycle there. So it doesn't have to go through all the different stages, and sometimes you can jump between different others. And when you then look at the different activities that can happen at each stage, you might just use one or two of them, and that's okay, because that sometimes create amazing discussion just within one activity alone. And that was the beauty of looking at different design thinking activities, that some you can discern and talk about and unpack for 10 minutes. Some might take weeks and weeks, and that's only on just on one element. What does assessment look like for a particular unit of work? Is it formative? Is it summative? If it's a summative assessment, what style of assessment might we introduce for that particular unit of work? Or are we allowing multiple mode of delivery for students? So for me, it was quite rich, and quite proud that it was something that we now use within our team, because it creates a shared common language within the team, and it can be personalized to our own context. When I was working with a school in Singapore recently, what they did was they said, "Oh, can you print our values and the different domains in our teaching and learning framework into the cards as well?" So when we're talking about curiosity, for instance, we then use our own language as well as one of the prompts to actually guide their learning. One of my staff uses two of the cards, and she stick it on the back of her in front of the desk, and those are the two things that she really wants to concentrate on as her own professional development for that particular year. So it was really cool to see. And again, for us, the good thing is that it's create that common language. It's non-time sensitive, and when I'm showing it in a digital sense, but in a practical sense, when people get it, it's always really awesome when you just dump 50 cards in front of them and see what they do. Some group them in various ways, and some think about what's important and not important for them in that particular time or that particular learning experience. Some things that they want to concentrate on now or work on later. And then ultimately unpacking what's valuable to them. So for instance, in this scenario, looking at different questions that they have in the celebration of learning and coming up with possible answers. And then from those possible answers, challenging themselves again and asking more and more questions. So for us, it created, a lot of discussions, and so it was amazing in, an amazing, a tool that we use now, and I know some other schools use as well, to really create that common conversation and to spark conversation as well within their team. So I might just leave it there for questions if anyone else got some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for your time and an interesting discussion about not only your journey, but your school's framework as well.